Hi everybody, I'm going to talk about the curricular issues and concerns. Persons with a disability are regarded as one of the most socially excluded groups in all societies today. Many policies and programs have been formulated for their inclusion and enhancement, and particularly in the field of education. Studies related to disability have been introduced. Though studies in disability have recently been formally recognized, but it started when the educators have resisted and spoken against the hegemony of special education, institutionalization, sheltered workshops, and social exclusion. Such studies also depend on the social theories which influence the understanding of disability to a great extent. Today, educators around the globe are stimulated by new ways of thinking about disability-related educational research, policy, and practice, such as issues on the curriculum under special education, communication techniques, rehabilitation, skill development, and inclusion. At the end of this talk, you will know the historical evolution of educational initiatives for children with a disability, understand the different curricular issues related to disability, gain adequate knowledge about constitutional and legal measures to safeguard the interests of the disabled in India, and learn the concept of inclusive education and the barriers in implementing inclusive education. Let me state the evolution of education of children with a disability from the stage of segregation to integration or inclusion into the regular schools. The formal education of children with a disability began in India in 1869 when Jane Lipo, with the support of the Church Missionary Society, started a school for the blind students in Benares. The first formal school for children with intellectual and physical disability was established in Kurseong in 1918 in the eastern part of India. The education of children with disability in segregated settings continued well after India gained independence from the Great Britain in 1947, with various non-government organizations assuming increasing responsibility for their education. By 1966, there were 115 schools for students with visual impairment, 70 schools for students with hearing impairment, 25 schools for students with orthopedic disability, and 27 schools for students with intellectual disability. By 1991, there were about 1,200 special schools for students with various types of disabilities in India. In 1974, the Ministry of Social Welfare, Central Government of India, initiated the Integrated Education Program to promote the integration of children with mild to moderate disability into regular schools. The program was also designed to promote the retention of children with a disability in the regular school system. Children were to be provided with financial support for books, stationery, school uniforms, transportation, special equipment, and aids. However, this program met with little success. In 1987, the Ministry of Human Resource Development, in association with UNICEF and the National Council of Educational Research and Training, developed the project for integrated education for the disabled. The aim of the project was to strengthen the IEDC plan. Instead of confining the program to a particular institution or school, it adopted a composite area approach that converted all regular schools within a specified area, referred to as a block, into integrated schools. As per the Constitution of India, education has emerged as one of the fundamental rights. The government has formulated a few policies and legislations regarding the education of people with disability. Let me outline some policies and legislations towards the education of the children with disability. The Integrated Education for the Disabled Children scheme, launched in 1974 to admit children with a disability in regular schools. The District Primary Education Program 1985, which acknowledges the fact that universalization of education is possible only if it includes children with a disability. The National Policy on Education in 1986, which promotes the integration of children with mild disability into the mainstream. The project Integrated Education for the Disabled, launched in 1987, which encourages all schools in a neighborhood to enroll children with a disability. The Persons with Disabilities Act 1995, which recommends making changes in assessment and curriculum and removing architectural barriers to support inclusion. It also recommends providing free books and uniform for children with a disability. The National Trust for the Welfare of Persons with Autism, Cerebral Palsy, Mental Retardation and Multiple Disability Act, which recommends promotion of inclusive education. The Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan in 2000 pledges that it will ensure that every child with special needs, irrespective of the kind, category and degree of disability, is provided education in an appropriate environment. The amendment to the Constitution in 2001 makes education a fundamental right for those in the 6 to 14 age group and covers children with disability. The draft National Policy for Persons with a Disability, which has a section on education, states that there is a need for mainstreaming of the persons with a disability in the general education system through inclusive education. It also mentions that children learn best in the company of their peers. A comprehensive plan of action for children and youth with disability was presented by the Minister for the Human Resource Development in March 2005. This action plan advocates inclusive education and envisages making all schools disabled friendly by 2020. The Rehabilitation Council of India is also working with the Indira Gandhi National Open University to develop audio and video materials for sensitization of parents and grassroots functionaries and making them aware of the productive capacity of children with a disability. The Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act 2009 makes the provision to offer special training in schools on the basis of age-appropriate learning material by specially appointed teachers for this purpose of induction into the age-appropriate class after special training and integrate with the rest of the class academically and emotionally. The teacher training program in each selected block followed a 3-level training approach, namely a 5-day orientation course for all the teachers in the regular schools, a 6-week intensive training course for 10% of the teachers, and a 1-year multi-category training program for 8 to 10 regular school teachers. The teachers who completed the 1-year multi-category training program were required to act as resource teachers. This project produced several positive results. As a result of improved program planning and better management skills now made available to the teachers, the capacity of various states to implement integration programs was enhanced. Let me discuss the challenges in implementing the integrated education for the children with disability. First, The challenge of poverty associated with disability. With an estimated 1,027 million people, India is the world's second most populated country. It has 17% of the global population and 20% of the world's out-of-school children. Despite impressive gains in the last few decades, India still has about 22% of its population below its official poverty limit. Ministry of Rural Development, Government of India, has allocated 3% funds in poverty alleviation programs targeting families of children with disability. However, motivating poor families with all the associated expenses to send their child to school is proving to be a big challenge. Next, the challenge of modifying deeply held attitudes. Attitudes of the non-disabled people are proving to be a major barrier in the social integration of persons with disability. The more severe and visible the deformity is, the greater is the fear of contagion, and this faulty perception of the non-disabled people perpetuates attitudes of aversion and discrimination towards the disabled. Many people hold the belief that disability is a consequence of misdeeds performed in the previous life, and therefore such religious beliefs may militate against any attempts to include students with disability into regular schools. Next, the challenge of dissemination and public education. People, including parents and school personnel, are largely unaware of the full intent of the recent legislation passed by the Indian Parliament. A large number of school personnel are also not aware of funding available to include students with disability in regular schools. Unless people, especially parents of children with disability and school personnel, are knowledgeable about the various provisions enshrined in the Act, the central and state government's commitment to providing integrated education will be in vain. Next, the challenge of providing adequate levels of training to key stakeholders. The majority of school personnel in India are not trained to design and implement educational programs for students with disability in regular schools. The universities which do cover some aspects of special education in their teacher training programs fail to train teachers adequately to work in integrated settings. For example, there is limited coverage of information about practical strategies. The number of trained special educators is also extremely small considering the number of children with disability. Last, inadequate resources. The majority of schools in India are poorly designed and very few are equipped to meet the unique needs of students with disability. The lack of disability-friendly transportation services and accessible buildings are considered by some to be far greater problems than social prejudice and negative attitudes. Both the central and state governments will have to provide increased resources to this aspect of education to ensure successful implementation of integrated practices in schools. Besides these challenges, India has some distinctive features that will make the implementation of educational reform particularly difficult. It is a multilingual, multicultural, multi-religious country, and its people are stratified along sharp socio-economic and caste lines. Therefore, unless the challenges are carefully identified and systematically addressed, inclusive education of children with disability will remain a policy on paper. Let me state the possible strategies to address some of the challenges. 1. If integrated education is to become a reality in India, then the training of teachers has to become a top priority. The educational authorities in India may adopt a policy of training one teacher from each school or a cluster of schools. The teacher would need to be provided with intensive training to work with various disabilities and could then act as an integration specialist or an inclusion facilitator for one or a number of schools located in the vicinity. Also, in-service teachers would need continued training to update their skills and knowledge of integrated education strategies. 2. There is a need to design some innovative models to train educators at mass level. One possibility to educate such a large number of teachers is by using distance open learning or DOL. Indira Gandhi National Open University, popularly known as IGNOU, has a history of successfully running courses for a large number of students using DOL mode. IGNOU, in association with Rehabilitation Council of India, is considering offering various courses to the trainers of children with disability, including teachers. It is expected that such training, accompanied with ongoing in-service training, would prove very useful for school educators. Practical aspects of implementing integrated education form a key part of any such course. 3. There is a need for collaboration between different ministries. For example, while integrated education is a responsibility of the Ministry of Human Resource Development, education in special schools is a responsibility of the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. This is just one example of the waste of already limited resources. India cannot afford to have such administrative arrangements. There is a need for streamlining administrative arrangements so that funds provided to different ministries for persons with disability can be used judiciously. 4. There is a great need to involve NGOs in implementing the integrated education program. Although not all NGOs are working in the education sector, a large number of them still provide educational services to children with disability. These organizations can play a significant role in implementing the integrated education because they are widely located in India and can serve both urban and rural school communities. It will be necessary to train the key stakeholders in these NGOs about the benefits of integrated education as well as practical aspects of implementing the integrated education in regular schools. 5. Most school educators in India are concerned that integration of students with a disability would result in lowering school standards because these students won't be able to get through examinations. This seems to be a genuine concern of teachers because it can influence their promotion. It is therefore necessary to establish an alternative system of examination for students with a disability. 6. The multilingual, multicultural and multi-religious nature of India is often cited as a challenge in implementing any educational reforms. Local universities in each of the states and union territories may play a significant role in overcoming this challenge. Pilot projects involving local schools could be initiated by universities to explore strategies that may be appropriate for each region. Also, texts on practical strategies can be produced in the common language spoken by educators in each of the states. 7. It will be of paramount importance to develop inclusive education, which means that the disabled and non-disabled persons learning together in schools and colleges with appropriate networks of support. Inclusion also means enabling students to participate in the life and work of mainstream institutions to the best of their abilities in accordance to their needs. At the same time, accessible curriculum refers to the designing of programs or courses and educational materials barrier-free without affecting the content and standard. If course content is well designed, disabled students will be able to gain access to it and will receive the same learning experience as their other classmates get. Let me describe some of the barriers towards implementing the inclusive education. First, attitudinal barriers. It has been noted that disabled students suffer from physical bullying or emotional bullying. These negative attitudes result in social discrimination and thus lead to isolation, which produces barriers to inclusion. The isolation which results from exclusion closes the doors of real learning. The negative attitudes often develop due to lack of knowledge. Along with the information about disability or condition, their requirements must be provided to peers, school staff and teachers as well. It is also very important to counsel the parents of these learners, especially in rural areas, about the importance of providing education for developing self-reliant individuals. There is also a need to shift in perspectives and values so that diversity is appreciated and teachers are given skills to provide all children, including those with different learning needs, with quality education. Also, at the policy level, it should be mandatory for all to get educated about disability so that responsive individuals who respect disability could be developed. 2. Physical barriers. Along with the attitudinal barriers which are faced by the learners on the daily basis, another important barrier is the physical barriers such as school buildings, playgrounds, washroom, library and so on. Apart from these, the majority of schools are physically inaccessible to many learners because of poor buildings, particularly in the rural areas. Since most of the schools are not equipped to respond to special needs, they become an obstacle for learners in physically getting into school. For example, many of the students require a personal assistant for such basic activities as taking lunch in recess, personal care, remedial education efforts. It is also important that reasonable accommodation and accessibility as prescribed by the universal design need to be made available in schools. Most school buildings do not respond to the requirement of these learners properly. For example, if there is a ramp, sometimes the incline is too steep, often the doors were too heavy for the student to open unaided, which impedes the access. Hence, it is necessary to improve the physical barriers in the centers of learning in order to enhance the inclusive education. 3. Inappropriate curriculum as a barrier. In any educational system, the curriculum is one of the major obstacles or tools to facilitate the development of more inclusive system. Curriculum includes the broad aims of education and has its implications on transactional and evaluation strategies. In our country of diversity, curriculum is designed centrally, hence which leaves very little flexibility for local adaptations or for teachers to experiment and try out new approaches. This results in making the content irrelevant and demotivating. Therefore, the design and development of specific learning and teaching materials and teaching arrangements should take into account the needs, interests, aspirations, and uniqueness of the learners. As a result of the knowledge-based curriculum, the examinations are also more content-oriented rather than success-oriented. 4. Untrained teachers as a barrier. For implementing the inclusive education successfully, it is important that teachers must have positive attitudes towards learners with special needs. But due to lack of knowledge and understanding, the teachers give inappropriate substitute work to the children with disability, which eventually leads to learners' dissatisfaction and poor quality of learning. It is therefore imperative that an inclusive teacher education program must be designed for teachers which can inculcate suitable skills for inclusive teaching. 5. Organization of the education system as a barrier. In our country, there are different systems of education such as private, government, and public schools which are developing unequal access and different levels of facilities and support. In general, those who have access to private schools have higher possibility of success as compared to those who go to government schools. Therefore, it is important that the policy of common school system must be placed properly. There is also a lack of information within many systems, and often there is not an accurate picture of the number of learners excluded from the school system. Very often, this leads to a situation where these learners do not have equal opportunities for further education or employment. It is also important to ensure that the key components of inclusive education related to students, teachers, infrastructure, and awareness generation are implemented effectively. While designing the curriculum, the educators should take care of the special needs of persons with disability and should think about various assistive measures which can help the learners to pursue the courses and programs smoothly. The important thing is to let the learners feel accepted. No one can anticipate everyone's needs, but one can let them know that he or she is willing and prepared to work with a person with a disability to the best of his or her ability. Let me sum up. Educators around the globe are stimulated by new ways of thinking about disability-related educational research, policy, and practice, such as issues on the curriculum under special education, communication techniques, rehabilitation, skill development, and inclusion. A comprehensive plan of action for children and youth with a disability, which was presented in March 2005, advocates inclusive education and envisages making all schools disabled friendly by 2020. There are some challenges in implementing the integrated and inclusive education for persons with a disability. Some strategies to address the challenges of inclusive education have evolved. There are some barriers towards implementation of inclusive education. Let me sign off now and hope to see you in another session. Thank you.